Surprise! It's Sunday. Usually I don't make videos on Sunday. Usually it's Wednesday or Friday. My Friday video, I wasn't too happy with. But I try to post them all in hopes that there's something of value in each one. One of the things I wanted to do was correct some things that I said in my last video that might not have been completely on track. The first one is I wanted to clarify the nature of the shadow. The shadow is a concept introduced and developed by the Swiss psychologist C.G. Jung, who was a student of Freud, who was credited as being the founder of psychoanalysis. Jung disagreed with Freud on a few points, quite a few points actually, in that Freud thought that the root of all psychological issues was sexual. Jung said, well, that's involved, but that's not the whole story. And he went on to develop this notion of the shadow. Now, another term for the shadow is the id, which is the deep primitive nature. The best example, to give you like an extreme contrast between the two, is Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Mr. Hyde is the shadow. He's the part of each of us that is completely ruled by their desires, their emotions, their instincts. He has, modern psychologists might call him a sociopath. When he's obsessed, they might call him a psychopath. But one of the things about Mr. Hyde that you have to kind of admire in some respects is that he is incredibly focused. Driven might be a better term. And when we are in the grip of that part of our nature, most of our actions feel as though they're compelled. Not something we have a choice in, but something that we do because we just have this overwhelming urge to do them. For instance, if we give into overindulgence or a sexual connection that we probably should avoid or turn down, when we deliberately abandon our self-control in whatever circumstance. Now, the shadow's not all bad. In fact, there are things about the shadow nature that were useful to us in the course of our development from ape to man. But the shadow also shows us part of that dividing line between animal and human consciousness. Now, the shadow has been described as being bestial, but that's not really quite right. Animals, more often than not, do things out of instinct rather than choice. They don't do it out of desire. They do it out of necessity. They do it because that's who they are. That's how they function. Some of Mr. Hyde's actions, some of the shadow actions are like that too. But even when we are in the grip of these things, we are, at least to some extent, aware that we are in the grip. And that kind of consciousness, that awareness of what we're doing and what we're feeling, is one of the things that distinguishes us from the animals. Now, with long exposure to humans, some animals appear to develop some of that same kind of choice and awareness that we humans possess. For instance, I mean, you're all familiar with the well, maybe you're not all, but most of you are familiar with the situation where a cat, for instance, is not happy with you and leaves you a little surprise in your shoe to register their displeasure with what you've done, or pees somewhere where they're not supposed to. And sometimes they look at you first like, I know you don't want me to do this. I know I'm not supposed to do this, but I'm doing it anyway. Some of that is closely related to this shadow idea. It's like where you look at that next drink and you say, I probably shouldn't have that, but oh yeah, well, we're blowing it out today. You know, whatever the consequences are, they are. Or a lot of times you don't even think in terms of consequences. It's just, it's what I want next. I want that, you know, that feeling that I get from having another drink or taking some substance that I probably shouldn't. And then, well, of course, there are times when changing your consciousness, even if it is with a substance that will do, that has the potential to do you some damage, there are times where changing your consciousness for a short time opens up new insights. Sometimes helps you make new connections on the invisible level. But that's not the point. The point is, I wanted to first of all, I wanted to clarify this issue and this concept of the difference between the shadow and the normal consciousness. Or, well, normal is a setting on a refrigerator. It doesn't apply a whole lot to people, but there is sort of a norm, a general average kind of consciousness that most people seem to possess. So that's your normal state. Most of that normal state, however, has been learned. It's not entirely natural, which is why for people who don't have a firm grip on themselves, or who don't realize that they don't have a firm grip on themselves, that that personality sometimes slips, and that's basically created by conditioning, training, education, etc. Some of that stuff is handy because it makes it easier anyway to have social order and force to be productive and stuff like that, and we don't have to think about it a whole lot. However, there's the other side of the coin, which is our emotional nature and our shadow nature, which also want to be expressed to some extent. Now, personally, I don't really do it entirely consciously, but I tend to suppress my emotions. I'm not as in touch with them as maybe I should be, and now and then creates obstructions for me. And I just have to kind of work through that. Say, well, you know, what's out of kilter, John? You know, what's going on here? And that's the first step in dealing with any of this stuff, whether it's your shadow nature, whether it's your emotions, whether it's dealing with a situation in your life, you know, external situation. The first thing is to identify it, to develop a little insight about what exactly is going on. And once you can see what's going on, then you're in a position to look into it a little further and see what kind of remedies you can come up with for it. Because the whole point of this, of our efforts here, is to pave the way for our success to be all we can be. If we don't deal with our shadow, sometimes it will jump out and say, "Hi there, I'm taking over for a while." Like, Dr. Jekyll, he's at a dinner party or something like that, and Mr. Hyde says, "It's my turn." Well, we don't want to get in situations like that. Nah. And the best way to do that is to integrate the shadow. And as far as your emotions are concerned, it's your psychological reaction to some of your experiences. You got to kind of work through that, and then you got to say, well, first of all, you have to identify it. Once you identify it, then you're in a position to kind of work through it and to formulate approaches and methods where you can take action in spite of it, or harness its energy to help you take more effective action. And these obstructions do come up, and sometimes they come up in the form of distractions. Sometimes they come up in the form of compulsions. I mean, it's like you had no intention of doing that, but you were, just sort of seized by an impulse to do it. I hope I'm not starting to sound like a basket case here, because most of the time I run on a pretty even keel. The biggest difficulty that I have to deal with is sort of a combination of procrastination and indulging myself, which I'm trying to learn not to do, in terms of distractions. Focus. Keep your eye on the ball, Keep your eye on the ball and your finger on the trigger, So anyway, this whole idea of the shadow, yes, it's something you need to deal with, something you need to be aware of, and it's actually a great source of energy if you can integrate it in some constructive way. Now, there's a whole field, a whole school of psychology that addresses this very issue. It's called depth psychology, and it's founded on Jungian principles. I am vaguely aware of it. I'm no expert. I hope I've given, well, from the research I've done since I spoke to you last, I'm fairly confident that I have accurately described it. It's the beast within. Now, the one who basically takes nothing into account but their instinctive drives, their immediate desires, their immediate feelings. They tend to have rages. They tend to have periods of manic joy. They also have, and these things are in some ways, these states are things that appeal to us on some level or another. Because to let your hair down, to let it all hang out, to just blast it out, and to act it out. Now, that's where the shadow not only causes us problems, but also gives us an immense sense of liberation. No constraints, no obstructions, no bumps in the road, just pure feeling. But that's raw energy. If you can learn to harness that raw energy, the depth psychology people claim to be able to help you find ways to do that. Your astrologer, I'm one of those, can also help you find ways to do that. But my whole point here is, first of all, to clarify the shadow and the normal conscious self. Many people call that the ego. Now, the ego is the mask that you wear for the outside world. Behind, or maybe infusing both of those is your spirit. And that's what's really important. The star. You remember that star that you're an incarnation of? Yes. That's the thing that can bring both of these others, the ego and the id, or the normal self and the shadow, can integrate them and make all of their power and abilities available for your use. Of course, you need to that use needs to be directed by the right part of yourself, and that's another thing that astrology can help you with. In fact, there's a situation like that. A person that I know very well went through a big change in their life, much for the better, and it was clear that it was basically a change in which planet is running the show. And there are ways, looking at a chart, where you can see which planet's running the show right now, and whether or not it would be better to put a different one in charge. Now, that may sound very simple, but it requires a certain amount of work on the individual's part, or it requires going through a period of transformative experiences. And I'm not talking about doing drugs. To change drivers, so to speak. Okay, I'm noticing that I'm running right up against 17 minutes. I wanted to clarify that stuff about the shadow. I wanted to give you a couple of other insights. That's it for right now, and I'll go back to my regular schedule as this week unfolds. Probably be seeing you on Wednesday. Have a great day. Have a great life. And make sure you keep your shadow under control. But the whole thing about this, though, is simple suppression or repression is a bad idea. You get all kinds of psychological problems when you do that. And that's true with your emotions, with your shadow self, with all sorts of things. The key is integration. Make it all work together. And there are ways to develop strategies to do this and put them into action that will support your success otherwise as well. Running over a little bit more, but this is very important stuff, and it is all about boundaries. It's about being firm about your boundaries, and being firm about once you've decided to take action, it's being firm about requiring yourself to develop and support the habits and attitudes that are required to make that action effective, and in some cases, to take that action in the first place. Yes, you have to deal with your shadow. Yes, you have to deal with your emotions. The thing is, there's a lot of energy there. Don't let it ride you. Put it in harness. Put the put the right guy up there. Imagine it as a chariot, okay? It's got a bunch of wild horses out in front of it. Put the right guy in place as the driver. Bring those horses to heel. Make them work as a team. Otherwise, who knows what may happen. And probably it won't be good. So, I've run almost to 20 minutes. I will be seeing you Wednesday. Keep in mind the difference between the normal consciousness and the shadow. Keep in mind the difficulties that arise because of repression or suppression. And the need to develop strategies to pull this together, to put the right part of yourself in charge. Till Wednesday, have a great week. This is Sunday, it's just starting.